that's been for you?
Yeah, so we started just about a year ago. We moved actually to the house that we're in now. And it's the first time we kind of had the space to do gardening. And I had never really done gardening before. But I knew it was something that I wanted to do with Tori. So, I asked my husband to kind of build me a garden. And as I was learning about gardening, I came across the sap pot probably on Instagram. And I thought it was a really cool idea. I love the idea of the worms getting out of the sap pot and bringing the nutrients straight to the plant. And I thought that would make my life easier than figuring out fertilizers and all of the other
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, we got the sap pot, we put it in, and it was just kind of like a trial and error thing. I just like
Yeah.
said, let's figure it out how it goes. And we are here a year later. We're now harvesting our compost and growing plants and loving it. So
Well, I love that. No, that's great. And it's been really common thread of conversation this week that people have only started a year or 2 years ago and they've already accomplished this much. So when I've seen your garden on Instagram, and by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen you on Instagram, can you share a little bit about, some of the activities you do and like, what do you try and put out there? Because it is amazing. I find
yeah.
it inspiring, but I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
So when my daughter was born, I started kind of reading and researching and kind of learning more about different ways to help kids develop and just child development. And I ran into the Montessori method, which covers a lot of things and it really is a form of education. But there's a lot of things that you can do as a parent that are aligned to that. And then you discover a lot more, right? But a big part of the method is helping the I can't speak today, develop through their senses. And it has a lot to do with being outside and in nature.
Right.
So that's kind of when I started. It was the middle of the pandemic, and I kind of was just being so amazed by the things that I was observing on her, and I kind of wanted to share with other parents that care, because in my private my private Instagram, my friends were a little tired and sick of hearing me talk about child development. So that's where we started. I just started sharing, and my goal is to inspire other parents to see what their children can do at a very young age, what they're really capable of, and connect them to the world, connect them to nature, and hopefully, just help the next generation be the best they can be. So that's what we do.
And did you find within yourself you were actually opening yourself up to new learning methods? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, does
So
that
yeah,
make sense?
it's a very different way to look at the world. Because I grew up with parents that were trying their best, but what they were doing
Hmm.
is, keeping me aside of any danger, keeping me aside of anything that didn't seem academic. And what we've learned today, and what it's really cool about Montessori, without trying to preach to anybody that method, it's that current research on child development and brain development, they back up everything that she talked about. And it has to do with how children learn through doing, through their senses, how much more capable they are than we give them credit for, when we give them the chance and we guide them with support to be able to do things. So that's kind of why I started sharing, because I started seeing everything that she could do at 13 months, 14 months, things that I would have never thought a young child could do. So
That's
it's totally changed my perspective on children.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask is my sister is a preschool teacher for Montessori, and I grew up.
Oh,
Well, I spent some time. I don't know too much about it though. Like honestly, like even though she's my sister, I haven't
yeah.
dived that deep into it. So I'm learning a lot right now. And I just remember like learning through her children's experience, and then reflecting on, as you're saying, her childhood and how it was very much uh, rigid, I would say, in
Yeah.
some ways. And uh, yeah, it's a whole different way of learning, just opening up with curiosity and connecting with nature. Um,
Yeah. Kind of what we do
that's
with children is what we do a lot with elderly people too. It's that
yeah,
we start seeing them as incapable, and we try to push
right.
them aside and do things for them instead of help them do it themselves. And you can
Mm,
tell a lot in the elderly that will frustrate them right away, because they want to still be able to do things themselves. It's the same with kids. They want to be able to do it. We need to help them get there.
We are just big kids at the end of the day, aren't we?
Yeah.
I want to chat a bit about like starting the garden, because it seems to have starting a garden and composting has a lot aligned with connecting with your senses and being outside and learning. So how did this all come to be, and how did that feel for Tori?
Yeah, we are very much a, fly by the seat of our pants kind of family here. So I just knew I wanted to start a garden and see where that took us. We bought seeds, we bought, little seed starting, and we just played with dirt, and half of it germinated and then the other half was either overwatered or too dry. So then we ended up buying some plants ready from the nursery and putting them down. So we were learning together, and I think that was very good, because I didn't get to be frustrated if she just threw dirt somewhere, because I had no expectations of what was going to happen. So I've learned a lot from that. It's just, in general, when you're presenting an activity to kids the first time, like let's say you present an activity with a solo cup, which I did once. They've never seen a solo cup. Like a child that hasn't been in a party, especially with the pandemic, hasn't seen a solo. You know what solo cup is, right?
I was about to ask.
Okay.
What is it? Soil cup?
Plastic cups.
Yeah.
Plastic red cups that like people use a lot for like parties.
Yes, I know the one. Yep.
Yeah, they're called solo cups here. So, you can present something in a solo cup, and then all of a sudden your child's like grabbing the solo cup and looking at it and turning it around and banging it, and you're like, no, you put stuff in it. But they've never seen a solo cup before. So for them, it's something so new that it's natural that they first want to just explore it. So it's kind of the same thing with gardening. Like if you're gonna plant seeds, don't expect to like open the seeds and your child to grab the seed and put in it dirt. Let them like shake the package and play with the package. And if the package is safe enough, mouth the package. So just give them like a good 10 minutes of just like being like, oh, this is a thing, like this exists in life. And then try to move on. So it's a lot of just taking it slow, giving them time for all the exploration, understanding that everything they do is because they're trying to learn about the world. They don't know these things. There are souls that came in with no knowledge of all of that's available. So
that's a great method. Yeah. So just expectations, just throw them out the window.
Yep.
Your child is not going to grow you food on the first day. But seems like, how has she progressed with it? At the start, I imagine there's a bit of curiosity, you're saying, but how is it today?
So at the beginning so we started, she was about 20 months. And honestly, I wish I had started with her sooner, just by doing things like that, like giving her a package of seeds and letting her shake it, or giving her a little bit of dirt and letting her, move it around. But, we were renting a home at the time, so there was no gardening being done. And so we started around 20 months, and she started doing all of those things, and I started guiding her on what to do. And then now a year later, she knows exactly what seeds are for. She still wants to shake the package sometimes when I give it to her. She still wants to explore the seeds and see them and see which ones are different. She's very interested on which seeds you can eat and which ones you can't eat.
Right. Wow.
But she knows the process. She's internalized it. There's a kind of famous thing that, people say in Montessori is that you might not remember the things that you do as a child, as a young child, but they become part of your soul. So like she might not remember herself planting the seeds, but she's internalized the whole process. She's internalized that plants come from seeds and that fruit comes from plants. And what's better preparation for life than knowing where your food comes from?
Well, yeah, it really is. And especially in this day and age where you can walk into a school and ask children, and there's so many of them that think that fruit and veggies come from the supermarket.
Right.
So there's huge disconnection. And what you're doing is giving your child this experience at such a young age, where it's just like, well, what can grow from there? Like, that's what I think. I'm like, if you understand these principles in nature and look at a garden and see that, wait, I can give this plant everything. I can give it sunlight, water, I can give it great soil, and it might not survive. And I think that's a really good lesson in life as well. It's like you could have everything, all the resources, and it might just not work out. Like,
Right.
good life
Right.
lesson there.
Right. And
So
helping
many,
them
so many
understand that
things.
it's also such a big, such a big part of it. Yeah, some plants just don't make it. Sometimes we get worms and they eat our plants.
Yep.
We just have a chipmunk that's like taking advantage of all our peace right now. So
That's it. I'm going to throw a question to the audience, because I feel like there's some parents out there that have tried to integrate gardening, composting, and just want to know a bit more information about there. So if anybody has experience with children or want to dive into this deeper, this is a really good opportunity to do that. I do want to share a little bit more about the composting aspect. What have you noticed with Tori getting into the compost? Like, how is it for her?
She loves it. I mean, she loves her worms. They're basically our worms, like our pets. Every time we open the, and that's an important thing to say too. It's that sometimes when we have time, we feed them with her. And when we don't have time, I'll just come in a time that she's napping or something and do it myself, because every time we do open the compost, she does want to have that experience of having a couple of worms and having them in her hand and putting them back in the dirt and then putting them back on the hand. There's a lot of exploration and sensory experience in there. But she loves it. She knows that they eat the fruits and vegetables that we're not eating. So anytime we're peeling something, like peeling a carrot, she knows that the worms will eat it. She'll talk about how the worms eat it. And yeah, anytime like if fruit went bad before we got to eat it, she knows that the worms, it's okay, the worms will eat it.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is such a great lesson, isn't it? And like that cycle of life and death, and how that circulates. Such an important lesson.
That was very cool about this year, is that we got to harvest the compost. So until now we had just kept feeding it, because I was waiting for the spring to actually get it out for the new season. So we kept just feeding it and feeding it, and this is the first time we actually separated it. We put it next to the compost, the sap pod, and then we waited a couple of hours, and then we went in and we looked for worms that were still in the pile, and we put them back in the sap pod, and she was so happy that she was rescuing all of the worms. And then we put that in her little wagon. We brought it to the garden beds that we were planting, and then she put the compost in there. So again, it's not like she's understanding the science behind it. Like, I'm not sure I understand the science behind it.
Yeah.
But it's being part of her, what she does. She knows that food turns into dirt, the dirt feeds the plants, that she eats the fruit from the plants. That she knows. And I didn't know that until, I don't know, 2 years ago, a year ago, when we started.
Well, that's great. And I hear a lot of those stories as well, is that parents actually want to start composting to teach their children, but they end up learning a lot in the process themselves. And it becomes this mutual benefit of knowledge. Looks like we just got a question. When letting the little kids help in the garden, sometimes they stomp on the plants or pull them out when trying to harvest. But the lessons learned are worth the price of some squash plants.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's part of the expectations. Like, you have to know, just like with anything else, they might not be the most gentle. They don't know yet. But they learn. They learn with time and patience. They'll learn faster than you think.
What would you say if you're new to this and you have a child that's not really into going outside in the garden? Any words of, like, is it worth encouraging them there, or just let them do what they want to do? Like, what would you say?
So you never really want to push them to do something they're not naturally interested, but they are children, toddlers especially, will be interested on what they see the adults doing. So you can go to the garden and set up a couple of buckets and a source of water, and let them go at it with water and buckets, and just entertain themselves with that, because that water and buckets and toddlers, that will be a winning combination most of the time. And then you start doing your thing. Just start planting. Just start doing what you're doing around them, and eventually they will get interested on what you're doing. You can't push somebody to be interested on something. And, you know, even online, you can share a meme or share something and all of a sudden spark this interest. But for children, once they see it, once they actually see it being done, when you're modeling, that is when they go, oh, this is important for them, then it's important. They're not just saying it. So just model, and let them be there. Let them do their thing. Yeah, the kids love having a responsibility and a job. Yep.
Responsibility. Watering. That's really cool. Yep. I love that. And I wish we could have a conversation in 20 years to hear how Tori's time in the garden and composting has affected her. I'd like to know, just say that you could see that far, or can prediction. How do you think this would change her perspective?
So for me, it's not really, I'm not trying to form a child here that's going to be like all about the earth and all about gardening. She might grow up and love the city life and want to move into New York City and want to be in a concrete jungle. It is her journey. It's not mine. All I can do is set up an environment that invites her and teaches her about it. And then even if she decides to go in the city, she'll know how things are done. She'll know to appreciate a fruit because she knows how long it takes to ripe. So it doesn't, you know, for me, I'm not doing it so she ends up doing something. I'm doing it so she can be the best that she's, I don't even know how to say it, that her life is leading to be.
I love that's the whole thing with expectations again. Sounds like that's the key to parenting.
Yeah, I mean, you have to let them follow their own path, right? Like she might not want anything to do with gardening when she's a teenager, and then she might not want anything to do with gardening when she first starts working or whatever, or she might be all about gardening. It's going to be her path. My job is not to set up a path for her. It's to let her experience all these wonderful things and learn, so then she can decide what path she wants to follow.
That's great. And just from my own personal experience, I lived in Byron Bay for the last 5 years, which is like the hippie capital of Australia.
Okay.
I don't know what equivalent would be like in America, but it was interesting because I hung around with a lot of older people, and a lot of their stories of their children growing up here in this real natural life, a lot of the pendulum swung the other way. The children went out to the cities. They just really wanted to do the other thing, and they ended up being a banker or being a lawyer and doing those things. But they would come back. I just kept hearing this. I was like, that's interesting. It's interesting that the child, like, they've been brought up in this area and they wanted to go the other way. So I don't know if you that really resonated with me, just hearing you say that. I was like, okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's normal because part of child development and human development, it's wanting to do your own thing and separate yourself from your parents. And it's not a bad thing. It's just you trying to understand who you are in life and what you actually like. I mean, I wasn't into gardening when I was, you know, a teenager. My parents did. We lived in a town where you couldn't really grow like plants with fruit, but they did their best to grow the plants that they could grow. And they really enjoyed it. And I never saw myself doing it. And now I'm here absolutely loving it. So, you know, you can go a full 180 on it, 360, whichever the degree is, that, you know, brings you right back. But yeah, it's her path. Again, I'm doing this so she gets the best exposure. So she learns about things that I never learned about, and in a tangible way. And then what she does with it, it's up to her.
Fantastic. And you kind of answered this before, but I'd like to dive into it a little bit deeper. Like, how has composting, is this the first time you've composted? Sorry, that's...
Oh yeah, I had no clue. So for me, composting, before I learned about the sap pod, it was like very yucky. There's a little bee. Very yucky, very messy, and probably not very healthy or sanitary, if you will. So I never really saw myself wanting to do much of composting. And it wasn't until I learned how easy it can be that I was like, okay, I actually think we can do this. You just like drop things in a bucket and the worms do the rest. So if anything, you have to just aerate it once in a while. So yeah, no, I always thought that composting was really, really hard and not something that, you know, just a regular person would want to do, which is crazy to me. Like now that I know things, my husband and I were talking the other day, it's just crazy to think that not everybody has like a blueberry bush. It's so easy to have. You can grow them in containers. You might not get as much as if you grow them in a garden, but you still get fruit. So why are we not just like, why don't people know that you can grow all these fruits that you can eat from right in your patio? You don't even actually need like a huge garden to do it. If I would have known that, we would have had a blueberry bush in a rental. I just didn't know it.
It's a really good question. And what I think is that people are scared of failing, you know, and I have that in my own experience in life. And like it almost becomes too much. Like I don't have enough knowledge for it. I don't have enough time. I don't want to fail at it.
Right.
And that's kind of the purposes of these conversations. And what I love trying to bring to people out there is like, well, let's not shame you about it. Let's educate you about it. So yeah, back to your point on that blueberry bush and growing it, like what would you say to somebody that's just new to, like on the edge and hasn't jumped into composting because of those reasons you just said? Like, how would you get them to start growing and composting?
Yeah, I would say do some research on the different way or the different tools that you have to compost, right? Like we are the sap pot and we really love the sap pot, but there's other ones there that might be better fit for your exact family. And I love how you guys came out with the mini sap pot that goes in kind of like a garden bed that you can have in your balcony, because that kind of solves all that issues of like people that don't have a garden or that can't set up something on the ground because they might live in a rental. But you know, do some research to find what would probably fit your family, and then move on from there, because we're all different, so we can't expect everybody to want to do exactly the same. But I'm probably very far away from ever composting that's not vermin composting, because it still scares me because I still don't know enough about it.
That's a really good point. No, I think I would yeah, if you've got food scraps like out there, I think worm composting is by far the best, because it's just like small space. These guys can eat so much food and they'll just take care of it. If you've got a lot of yard trimmings and grass, then, you know, maybe it does make sense to build a pile compost. And I love hot compost systems. So I like that. Yeah, explore, do the research yourself. I think that's really important. And later today, actually, in a few hours, we do have a live with Compostable Kate. We're going to be talking about the principles of composting for anybody out there. But yeah, back to you, Tori's mum. I think what would be really cool to end this live is just talking a little bit more about how bringing education, like gardening, like what lessons have you given Tori in the garden?
So it's funny because, you know, when you follow a certain method or for example the Montessori method, you know, there's certain materials and there's certain lessons that you do mostly with preschoolers, but you kind of get to know about them. And one of them is, for example, just color, distinguishing different colors. So you have color tablets and you compare them and then you try to separate them and classify them. And as we're going through the gardening, I'm like, she's doing all of that when we're looking for tomatoes. She's looking at the right tomatoes, right? And she's saying, and we taught her, okay, we have to wait until they're red, even though you can't let them ripe off the vine, but she will try to eat them right away. So we said, you know, we have to wait until they're red. And so she will be like, okay, this is green, this is orange, this is yellow, this is red, this one I can pick. And that exercise alone, it's visual discrimination. It's like, you know, a bunch of like technical terms that you can talk about. Just in the simple act of picking tomatoes, she's practicing her colors, she's practicing her fine motor skills, she's doing all this mental work that you as an adult take for granted because you've been doing them for 30 something years, but you know, a 2-year-old hasn't done them, and all that work is what you would, you know, pay a lot of money for somebody to teach them. So you know, there's all these things that you do in regular life that will develop all these brain connections that will set her up for later. If she wants to be a banker later, that attention to detail will help her, right? If she wants to be a neurosurgeon, she needs good hands. You get good hands from using your hands and strengthening the muscles that you use when you're planting, when you're picking up a seed that is tiny. It's the same skill that you need to use a scalp very finely. So is that connection of saying, hey, all that she's working on right now, it's going to help her, whatever she decides to be.
That's fantastic. I love the way you just explained that, especially because, like, yeah, we use all these big scientific names to be able to define something when it is really so simple. Yeah, humans, and I do it myself, is like we like to complicate things.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the worms, right? Like she's learning how to grab a little thing that you can easily squash, right? But she's learning how to do it gently. She's learning how it feels in her hands. And all of that, it's things that she's going to use later. If she wants to be a pottery maker, she's going to learn how to be able to use her hands with different strength, right? That's also helping her. So beyond just the fact of like understanding life and nature and all of the, beautiful things that we can talk about, the very practical things of using their hands with a purpose, it's going to set her up for being able to do them later as well. Way better than,
Have you noticed anything with her mood? Has there anything with her mood in the garden?
Yeah, so anytime that we're outside, it's, a break from any toddler behavior that could be, kind of unwanted by a parent. But with the worms, they really, sometimes when we are not having a great day, we will just make it to the garden, open the compost, and I'll just let her be with the worms, and she'll look for them and she'll grab them. And it's just, I think anytime that you're connecting to the soil, you get this kind of like grounded, relaxing feeling. So she loves it. I love it. It gives me a second to breathe. It's a win-win.
Well, there's science backing that one up as well.
Yeah.
Certain microbes in the soil help us release serotonin. And of course, everything else, just being in nature and having those bountiful of green around us, like that just makes us feel like we've got abundance. So like, yeah, as you said, science backing it up, but again, it just comes back to simplicity.
Yeah, no, but she loves it. I mean, for her, the worms are her pets. She comes there. Yeah. I don't like touching the worms, so I have either gloves on or a tool on. And that's the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about, is that if you're a parent that doesn't like all these things, you don't have to. You can let them know that you don't love grabbing them, but that they're welcome to. And that's what we do. She knows I don't like them in my body. She knows I'm okay in my pants, like if I have pants on, but I don't like the feeling of them in my body. And it's boundaries that we have set up. But she's welcome to grab them, and when she wants my help, I either put a glove or I grab a little stick and I do it with that. So you don't have to love, well, I don't love bugs. I'm very far away from loving bugs. But you don't have to love them to find ways to not pass that along.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really genuine response. And I feel like that's a really big barrier for people to get in there. Like, don't like bugs, but you don't have to touch any bugs, really. That's why you have the aerator. And I love that you've found a way to be able to give that to Tori, but at the same time, you've like, no, I'm cool over here. I don't need to go touch it.
Yeah, and it's the same thing when we harvested. We wanted to rescue a couple of them, put them right straight in the compost. I'm like, great, this is a great job for you. Grab them, put them back in. I'll be supervising. I don't have to really grab them. I had my gloves, so I grabbed a couple, but you don't have to be fully in love with the whole thing to give your toddler the opportunity to do them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tori's mum. I just wanted to give you a moment to say anything you want to the people watching out there. If you want to give a few last words to them.
That's kind of funny. trying to think about last few words. I would say just learn more about it and kind of just take the jump if you're on the edge of. I have a couple of reels on like what plants are good for toddlers, but really peas are easy, tomatoes are easy. Strawberries is probably another one, or any berry bush that doesn't have thorns is another one that I would throw in there, that it's easy to grow. And with composting, it's just, look for something that's doable for you. But it's so gratifying. It's, you kind of get addicted to composting after a while. It's like if you see food scraps, Sometimes my husband is like on the lazy side and he's like, can I just throw this? And I'm like, no, we need that. So it really is very gratifying. It's not just for, your kid. It's really a great thing to do, knowing that those things are not going, because I also didn't know that what happens when they go into landfills. In my head, you throw a banana peel and it's biodegradable, right? It decomposes and it converts into nothing and we're all good. I had no clue that it's actually not like that, that you are actually doing a lot of damage by sending it to a landfill. So that completely changed my outlook on what we need to be doing.
That's a really good reminder about that aspect of like what happens when you put your food waste in the bin. It just becomes completely oblivious to some people, and it's not their fault. It's like we don't talk about it. We really don't talk about those damages. It's like putting dirty laundry under your bed. Just don't see it until one day it might stink. But thank you. I really want to say thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah,
sure. I've personally learned quite a lot. I love working with children, and just I'm taking away that idea of expectations. I think that's probably a good life lesson for a lot of things, right?
Yeah, but that's a key with toddlers. Anything you do, you have to go in with low expectations.
And the modeling one, that was a really good tip as well. But for anybody out there, like this, Halfway Missouri is fantastic. Like I love it. Really inspiring. Lots of fun and games. And I think why I love it is because you bring that fun and that curiosity to a lot of these things that might seem a bit mundane. So you put a different spin on it. So anybody out there who hasn't checked it out, please do. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. That's kind of the whole thing that I want to do with the page, is just to feel things much more accessible, much easier, to not shame anybody for not doing them a certain way, or tell you how you should do it. It's just showing you how fun and easy some things could be and how capable toddlers really are. So that means a lot.
That's a great message. Really good message. Thank you so much. And thank you
you
everybody for joining. Enjoy the happy International Compost Awareness Week. I'll be back later today with Compostable Kate if anybody is around.